Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Effed Up Stories. I am your host, Will Pender.
And I am your co-host, Ryan Sharp.
And I hope you guys have missed us as much as we have missed you. I realize we haven't done a show for a while now, and that has to do with, Ryan moved. I'm about to move. So we're going to try and stockpile a couple episodes together for you guys before Ryan comes home for vacation, which is around the time I move. And we're actually going to try and do something special for you guys while he's home, since we haven't been in the same room together for about a decade. But that said, we're going to jump into an episode here. Before we do so, if you have an effed up story of your own and you'd like to get it on the website and into a podcast, you can do so by going to effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. Go to the submissions link, fill out the form, hit submit, and we'll get that online. And with that having been said, we're going to jump into a user submitted story. The name that this person used, I can't see it being the real name, but anyway, an alias or what have you is Amethyst Rivet. And if you wanted to read the original on the site, it's called The Dark Side of the House. So, let's get into her story. She recently listened to one of our episodes on the Shadow People. And I guess that sparked her own little story in her memory that she wanted to share with us. So, at this time, when she sent the story, which, by the way, was on March 30th, 2016, she was 24 years old. And at this point in her life, she had experienced 3 major encounters with the paranormal, all within the same time span of a year, and all in her present living location. Now, before she gets into the story, she wants to just give us a disclaimer, and I guess a little backstory. She does believe in the paranormal. She's always believed in it since she was a child, and she had her first experience when she was around the age of 5. And the house that she spent most of her childhood in, she said, was incredibly haunted, both by poltergeist activity and what she believes to be whatever is imprinted in the land. And she suspects that it is Native American lands, and that I guess something terrible had happened there. And she has an open mind in regards to the supernatural, but she never really chalks things up to being paranormal without an attempt to debunk it first. And I'm just going to chime in and say that I'm the same way. I read these stories all the time, and I've always been a fan of it. I've grown up with it, but most times when I experience strange things, I do rationalize it. I do try to make sense of it, and even when I can't, unless it was something major, something that really shocks me, I will just put it out of my head and forget about it. In fact, most times I forget to even tell anybody, or I might mention it to my wife in passing, but never really giving it the focus that it might deserve. And I think a lot of people are like that. But getting back to her story here, she said, with that said, she also came to believe that her current home is haunted, but in a vastly different way than her previous experiences. So she's had many paranormal experiences in her new house. Some of these are described as disembodied voices, obvious movements in the house, things being tampered with, light anomalies, and shadows. Pretty much all the things that you would come to expect from a haunted location. And basically, she just wants to go over the shadow people experiences that she's had, because otherwise, I guess she has a lot to tell. So, having lived in many haunted houses throughout her life, she has to admit that there's something very different with the energy and the activity in her current home. Since moving there, which was in March of 2015, there was always something off about the place. There would be days to months where things felt normal. The atmosphere was light, it felt lifted. She could breathe easy during these times. But then there would be these lengths of time where the atmosphere would suddenly change. At first, it was like there was what she describes as a pressure change. Everything just felt heavier, and something that felt wrong would just wash over her. For example, sometimes out of nowhere, she would get these intense negative feelings such as anxiety, paranoia, and it began to feel like she was being watched. And it's during these times that paranormal activity would often occur. So the first encounter that she wanted to speak of there with the shadow happened around 2 months after moving in. The house was in this phase of feeling wrong, and it was like this for several days with minor occurrences that were happening throughout, but she was generally trying to ignore it. And most of the paranormal and creepiness that would take place only happened, and this is interesting, it would only happen on one side of the house. And most significantly for her, it would be in this particular hallway. And she said that side of the house has one bathroom, it has 3 bedrooms, and one of these bedrooms she had turned into a study. So she spent a lot of time in that room despite this incredible sense of dread and just overall creepiness that she felt while being there. And one day, while she was getting ready for work, she was late in the morning, it was close to midday, and she was just about to leave when she realized that she had left her phone in the study room. So she quickly went to retrieve it, but as she walked into the room, she nearly collided with this enormous dark mass standing in the middle of the room. She said this shadow was about 7 feet tall. It nearly was, head touching the ceiling. It was featureless. I guess you could say typical to a shadow man. She said it had only an outline of a humanoid form, but it was pitch black, could not see through it, and again, no details. She said she yelped, she froze mid-step, and it appeared as startled as she was. And for a moment, her and this thing simply stared at one another, I guess each of them in shock. And then he appeared, or I should say he disappeared in this blur-like transition, seemingly rushing out of the closed window that was behind him. And she knows what she saw, but she attempted to debunk what had happened, trying to recreate what she had just witnessed with no luck. So she saw what she saw, and she couldn't explain it. And as she left for work, she could only conclude that whatever she had been feeling had finally shown itself in physical form. And so months went by, and even though paranormal occurrences continued to happen, she had not ran into the shadow since that first encounter, and she ended up getting pregnant back in July of 2015, and for the most part, it was just an easy pregnancy. She went through the first 2 trimesters with little to no disruptive symptoms, going on about her daily routine as if she wasn't with child. Aside from the usual things that women do, modifying their diet and other common sense changes that need to be done once becoming pregnant. But it was relatively easygoing. And in the beginning of January, when a quiet spell of the month, I guess she said in December it broke, and actively seemed to pick up to January, it was just wrong there. And she said one morning, while she was getting ready to do her workout, she went to the hallway bathroom before starting, and as she approached the hallway, she almost ran into this shadow figure again, which was now standing across the bathroom door next to the study. And it was the same vastly tall shadow with the solid black mass that she saw before. She said, it can't be mistaken for anything but what it was. And the encounter was so unexpected that she almost didn't realize that it was there until it turned and vanished, seemingly going into the study. And she froze, trying to decipher if what she had saw was the same shadow person from before. And so she went to investigate, but found nothing. And so she just went on about her day, ignoring the experience until the following day when she decided she would attempt to debunk whatever this was. She thought that there was a possibility that she simply saw two of her own shadows due to, different light sources in the house. And she knew that the living room light was on, but there was also a chance that she may have had the kitchen light on. So she tried to, flick on different lights in the house and see if she could replicate the shadows that she had seen. And after this investigation, she realized immediately that, she did not witness two shadows. It was clear that even with the kitchen light casting a second shadow against the wall, what she originally saw was taller, it was solid, whereas her shadow was transparent, and it moved independently before disappearing into the wrong direction, from her movements to the bathroom. So I guess inside her mind, she knew that, she wasn't really going to be able to replicate this. But this is what we do. We try and put a rational explanation on these things.
Well, you gotta try and make something like that fit into your day-to-day experiences, right?
Exactly. And in her case, I get that. A lot of people do that. Even I do that. You try to make sense of what had happened in a rational terms. But even quickly after trying to do this, it's funny, but it almost sounded silly that it could be from a light source, because let's face it, it was solid black, it was really tall, and it moved independently of her. Shadows don't do that unless you're Peter Pan, right? So that was really bizarre. So shortly after this encounter, she's 29 weeks pregnant at this point, and she suddenly had complications that made her rush to the ER. And the doctors couldn't find what the cause of these complications were. She said that she actually became symptomatic to preterm labor. And so they sent her home, not being able to do anything else for her. And over the course of the next 2 weeks, she was in and out of the hospital regularly, steadily getting worse. And the doctors continued to say that there was nothing that they could discern that was causing these health issues. And the activity in the house just continued to soar. She constantly saw movement in the hallway. She would hear a cadence of voices. And this is all while she's the only one in the house. Objects were moving around, being displaced, and she kept seeing balls of light and dark spots that she described similar to flies, that would dart around the house. And she was just getting sick trying to fight whatever this was. It was getting very hard to live with. And the day things came to a head is when she knew she was going into labor. She said she was in agony. She was alone in the house, lying on the couch, unable to do anything for herself at that point but cry. She was contemplating on whether she should go back to the hospital, even though the doctors at this point were becoming irate with her and pretty much told her not to come back unless it was a real emergency. And as she was lying there, she got this inkling to look up, and her gaze was immediately drawn to the hallway. And the hallway was dark due to the lack of lighting in the house, but plain as day, against that dark of the hall, she saw a solid black figure. So even still with the darkness, this figure was a very contrasting, completely deep black. And she said it was standing at the corner of the hallway in a sneaky sort of stance, almost in the living room, but just out of reach of the only light source in the house, which was her living room lamp. And despite the utter lack of facial features, she knew it was watching her and had been for some time. So she watched it retreat back into the dark hallway out of sight before she, got the nerve to move, at which she jumped up to glance into the hallway, of course seeing nothing. She went to get her phone and immediately called her mother, which was the only person that she knew that believes in the paranormal, and she told her everything that had happened up to this point. And her mother convinced her to go back to the hospital, where they realized that she was finally going into labor and was admitted to a high-risk unit at the hospital 2 hours away for 2 weeks until she had an emergency C-section, and then another 2 weeks while her child was in the NICU. She doesn't know if the complications were merely a coincidence as the activity of the house picked up, or if there was a direct correlation with her encounters and her deteriorating health. She does know that according to their landlord, that place was owned by only one person before he purchased it. And that person was a lady, and she lived there from 2009 to 2015 before she put it up for sale at a ridiculously low price. And as we all know, with houses, oftentimes if you see them going for a low price, there's usually some kind of history there. It doesn't always have to be paranormal, but there's usually some history there. There's a reason why people want to get rid of it for cheap. And she stated that apparently she needed to move out quickly, didn't explain any further, which I guess would come across as suspicious. And she also told her current landlord that she never used one side of the house, which was interesting because the one side of the house that she wouldn't use, that is the side of the house where all of the activity happened for the lady in our story. So that's something I find interesting. So we have a woman who buys a house, which is a considerable investment. I mean, let's face it, most people aren't even going to be homeowners, right? She buys a house. She lives in it for 6 years. Most people, you buy a house, you're done, right? But if you do sell it, you don't really sell it for cheap unless, I guess it's falling apart. You can't renovate it. You can't fix it. You don't have the money to do so. You don't have the money to keep up with the mortgage payments, or you have to leave. You have to move. But the thing with this lady that was suspicious was, I guess, the fact that she seemed to have moved out rather quickly when it happened, according to what she told her landlord, and she wouldn't use one side of the house. Now, I don't know of anybody who buys a home and don't use one side of the house, and obviously that's the same side of the house that the lady of our story has her issues on. So I think that yes, this woman found something there that is not normal and didn't want to deal with, so she sold it. Now,
well, it was just testament to how how extreme whatever she was feeling was. To be so uncomfortable in your own space, in your own home, you didn't use half of the space. That's extreme.
That is extreme, and I don't know if. I mean, this is one of her questions, right? She doesn't know if the complications in her pregnancy was, a correlation to this encounter with the shadow being. I don't know if I see anything there that I could say, well.
Well, you know what I find interesting?
What?
The number of stories that we've received over the past few years connected with pregnant women.
That's true, yeah.
I mean, we've had UFO stories, ghost stories. I think one was a possible demon possession story. But just the numbers would seem to indicate that there is some kind of, maybe they're drawn to it. I'm not sure, but it's interesting. It's not something I really thought about until just now, but here we are. Here's another story. Here's another. Now, I'm not saying that the child or or the woman becoming pregnant created the paranormal activity, but there certainly seems to be some kind of link between different kinds of paranormal things, whether it be extraterrestrials or UFOs, ghosts.
Here's a random thought to throw at you. You know how they say poltergeist activity is a manifestation of, prepubescent teenagers, because the hormones are high.
It's the puberty scenario.
Right, it's the hormones, right?
Yeah.
Well, if you're pregnant, your hormones are, again...
That's true.
They're elevated, right? So maybe that is a contributing factor right there.
I guess the theory with the poltergeist and the teenagers, I think the idea behind that is that the teenagers themselves are creating some kind of psychic outlashing. There's some kind of latent ability that people have, and that while you're going through puberty, it's such a huge change that in some people it could even activate this latent psychic ability, and through the course of going through puberty, just the trauma of that triggers it, and they unconsciously psychically lash out. So I guess the same could be said with pregnancy, the extreme chemical changes that are going on within a woman's body sometimes do manifest themselves as extreme emotional swings.
Of course, now, that being the case, I mean, because we're just having a thought experiment here, but...
is your wife conjuring up any poltergeists?
Mine? Oh, no, we're not talking there yet. I haven't, no, I guess the point I'm trying to get at here is that we have, this woman, and she's pregnant, and yeah, she's hormonal, but at the same time, that is usually tied to poltergeist activity. And there was some of that she described in her story, but the main feature being a shadow figure.
The shadow people.
Which I haven't ever heard tied to it, but I guess more importantly was that the woman before who lived there, she had these experiences. And, who knows, maybe she was pregnant too, but I find it interesting that it was all on one side of the home. And that to me says that, her first thought that perhaps the house was built on some kind of land, and everybody says Indian burial ground, right? It's like they're guilty for all the sour land in the world. It's like there's something they're doing, man. When they bury their ancestors or whatever, they bury them real fucked up, and it corrupts the land for the future, right? But no, I think that she might have been onto something with that. It just seems too localized. I mean, you have a home and it's only on half of it.
Yeah.
Perhaps buried under their home is the body of someone who's been murdered or.
Well, and here's the thing that's so difficult with figuring out a situation like this. So, if you reason out, okay, this is only happening on the one side of the house, perhaps it's something tied more so to the land, the physical property, than the actual structure. So now the next logical leap to make is to think about, well, what is it about the actual land itself that would allow this kind of phenomenon to happen? Is it, a high concentration of quartz crystal?
Yes, we jumped on that before. There must be some kind of, I guess, a recordable material, right? And the best analogy I could make for that is, remember when they came up with tape, right? So you had all this magnetic material that they discovered that you could imprint you could imprint sound into this magnetic whatever. And then I remember we discussed this before, this idea where certain locations with quartz stones or other certain kinds of rock that could hold memory.
Yes.
Right. The idea that if something really bizarre or energetic, like, and when I say energetic, I mean like if someone's murdered, if someone's killed, like there's a lot of emotion, right? There's a lot of emotion that's not normal that escapes. That perhaps it does get trapped in these stones and record it, and so when you see these hauntings and stuff like that, maybe that, is this energy that's imprinted there, or perhaps even we have residual hauntings, which are a replay of past events. And in that case, I think that possibly, a traumatic event is recorded into these stones, just like a cassette tape. And every now and then when the conditions are just right, it plays back, just like a recorded event on, say, a VHS.
And unfortunately, in this case, it doesn't even look to be something as benign as a ghost recording. Because this thing appeared to be observing her, almost slyly at times, as she put it, kind of peeking around the corner at her. So is there something about the land, something about the geology that's allowing a visitor to come across?
I think certain areas, I've heard this many times before, but they say there's these portals to hell and the other worlds and stuff like that are, basically these tears that are all over the world in different locations. Every culture seems to have these places like that.
Yeah.
And it makes me think, like, okay, if you're looking at the Earth, and you know how many of these different layers of things, you have the magnetosphere, you have the atmosphere, you have blah, 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 blah. You have all these different layers, but perhaps
troposphere, stratosphere.
I'm not going to be able to list them all off, but I'll tell you, it makes me wonder if there's, I guess a reality sphere, or if you want, a gate from this world, from the others, something that's supposed to keep us inside of it,
So kind of going back to the many worlds theory.
Yeah, the many worlds
theory.
There's
all these parallel dimensions to ours, and there's probably an infinite number of Earths in existence where all kinds of different, in some instances is not even called Earth.
Well, you know how, if you look at the magnetosphere, for example, there's a big hole in it. Of course, there's a hole in the ozone layer.
Yeah.
It's not perfect. What I'm trying to say is that, yeah, we got these layers, but it doesn't mean that they're even all the way around. There's different things that put holes in it. And in terms of if we have a layer that can block out, we'll say, different dimensional beings or ghosts or whatever, perhaps there's holes in that too. It could be like Swiss cheese. And when you're in a location like that, maybe that is how
that there's places where there's a weakness to the fabric of reality, and it allows things to slip through.
Exactly. And then maybe that's just one conditional component of it. Maybe it also, for these things to happen, there has to be some kind of a traumatic thing that had happened there. And sometimes it might not even be like a traumatic event like that, but I think there's something to be said for, I guess, people who play around or dabble or more seriously in the occult and stuff like that. I mean, we've got a number of stories like that too. Who's to say
somebody didn't leave the door ajar?
Yeah, like, I mean, people active, like, in these different groups, there are people who actively seek out to open portals where there are none, right? So who's to say that there wasn't a group, perhaps before there was even a home there, way back when it was just land. Maybe it was a good a spot away from other towns and or whatever. It could have been in a wooded area.
It could have happened before it was even declared to be part of North America.
Right. So at some point,
we've been around for 200,000 years or more. Lots of opportunity to fuck with stuff.
Yeah. So
that's one thing you never see. Hey,
why?
You never see a story where somebody is like, I walked out of my house and wouldn't you guess I seen the ghost of a caveman.
Yeah, you don't.
He was hunting a ghost of a saber-toothed tiger, and they were running down the street, and it scared the shit out of me.
That's an interesting point.
Maybe there's an expiration date on ghosts. Like you don't ever see them any further back than
Well, that's what I'm thinking. Like
1600s or something.
If you take a CD, now there's two different kinds. Basically, you have your burned variety, where it's an ink layer that you're burning the little holes in,
and then the stamp.
The stamp, which is everybody's preference, is supposed to live longer.
Oh, but, it does. There's actual physical grooves in there.
It is, but the CD companies have been saying forever that the new technology they have allowed. Anyway, I don't believe it. I'm for stamp, but anyway, they're supposed to last up to like 100 years, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, perhaps the same thing could happen with a ghost recorded into I guess the material around, whether you want to say that it's a kind of stone or whatever, but perhaps it gets recorded, and that energy is only going to last for so long before it dissipates and is gone somewhere else. So that could be an answer. Or
so you think that all ghosts are energy recordings?
Well, I think
once you die, you're gone, and anything that remains here is just like a figment.
Well, here, that's a good question.
Well, that's why I asked it.
Well, that's a good way to put it. It's interesting because, like I said, you have residual hauntings, which are just a replay. That's a replay of an event that's recorded.
Assume, right?
Like we assume.
We've been studying ghosts since before Ghostbusters were around. So,
well, they do say that basically a residual haunting happens the exact same way every time. It's kind of like those people that are like, oh yeah, on the coast every time at this time of year or
when
whatever.
It's stormy on the 4th of September on a cold night, you'll see the ghost ship.
Or like this woman who looks for her lost lover lost at sea.
She'll be out on those rocks and you'll hear her singing.
Right, but it changes things when it becomes a actual intelligible, like something that's playing with you, that's talking, interacting with you. That is entirely different, and that is something that
we can record things like that too. It's called AI.
True. That's
just a complex recording.
So what do you think? You think that a ghost would be basically the glitch of a program? Something that's gotten out of phase.
Well, the idea that your mind, your consciousness, the hell or high water moves on to the next thing. Like that's kind of, I don't know, maybe it's more comforting to think of it that way. That regardless of what happens, your consciousness slips on into the next world. It doesn't really linger around. Maybe a few minutes or a few hours or something, but I think it happens instantaneously. You're dead, boom, you're gone to the next. Like when you're really gone, like you're a 30-meter skid mark on a highway, and you're not coming back. At that instant, you're gone to the next thing. And any remnant, even a ghost where people can ask it simple questions. Maybe it's not that a ghost is confused, as it's just a hollow imprint of what was once a person, and there's just a limited amount of information recorded in it, and it might answer like the person, and it might have some memories like the person, but that person is long gone, and all that remains is a holographic imprint.
The more I talk about death, and the more that we discuss that, I feel like, so when I die, am I just gonna like pull off the most advanced Oculus Rift ever? I'm just gonna be like,
whoa.
It's like, man, that game was so fucking realistic.
Yeah, you blink right? A couple of seconds in confusion, and then a somewhat familiar three-eyed face pokes itself in front of you and says, "I told you you'd love it."
I was like, well, that game wasn't really that great.
Yeah, it was kind of short, you know.
It was real fucking one-sided. I'll tell you that, right? And there was a shortage of chairs down there.
I really felt like I was fighting with the UI the whole time.
Yeah, and don't even get me started on the random drops.
Random drops and mini games.
See all these people in fucking mansions. Here I am banging two rocks together.
The NPC interactions could have been a little more personable.
Yeah.
Oh man, if only. But I wouldn't be surprised if it was something like that, right? Like us coming into this world is this crazy, it must be almost like a psychedelic experience, right? It's probably a good thing we don't remember it, because it was like this hellish, loud, bright, like intense trip for the first couple of days, like when sweet sleep overtook you. And even that for the first time must have been terrifying. We're like, what's happening? I'm passing out. Oh my god, I'm dying. That's it. A few short hours is all I got, and I'm out.
I actually heard from somebody, who had allegedly died several times, and she was talking about basically she was depressed, and she was saying how she wanted to die and stuff like that. And I more or less said, well, why would you want that? And she said something I found kind of interesting. She said that it's actually really hard to breathe. She said you don't realize it when you're here, but when you're crossed over and you don't have to do it anymore, when you come back, you realize just how uncomfortable and how hard it is to breathe. And it made me think, like,
I've been smoking for 15 years. I know what she's talking about.
Yeah, but you'd
it's a
have
struggle every breath.
Yeah, well, your lungs are probably like tarred confetti down there. Yeah, so
like a pair of oversized raisins just hanging.
Yeah, you basically need.
They're actually great. They're actually great. I got my X-rays and my lungs are fine, so no worries.
For now.
Yeah.
Cigarettes are. Who am I kidding? I used to smoke, but I'm never touching them again. Fuck that. If I'm gonna die, I'm at least gonna be able to say that I tried to not die. Like I made an effort to not.
Yeah, but you're gonna feel awfully stupid when you take off those super advanced goggles and realize that I was playing on hardcore mode. Smoked until the day he died. Anyway, when it comes to.
Yeah, go on. Sorry.
When it comes to these kinds of questions, it really gets to the fundamentals of the whole paranormal experience, and I'd be remiss not to bring it up, since it's been part of every Shadow Man topic. But the Jinn, right? They're strongly connected. With their specific lore. There's a lot of lore on the Jinn, and when you really dig into it, that's the whole shadow aspect seems to fit them really well.
Although there is something that's a little bit different. Every story that I hear with Shadow Man, I'm not kidding, just think about it. All the different stories that you've heard and you read, almost every time I hear them, it's like in somebody's house, or it's in your room, or it's in a building. It's never... I can't recall anyway a story where I remember hearing somebody say they saw a shadow person outside in a field somewhere, and the contrast there being that the Jinn apparently, are in these really wide open fields. And apparently, if you remember, people would hear them on the wind.
Yeah,
Right?
but that's where they, that's where they live and they hang out. I guess with the lore of the Jinn, it's like they pick these areas that are easy for them to pass back and forth between their world and our world, and they pick these out of the way regions where they do their crossings most often, and select those to be in our world as their lair or whatever. So if you roll up on a Jinn in its lair, it's not going to be all cloaked up in observation mode, right? It's going to come out with a baseball bat and be like, "What the fuck are you doing in my house?" And with I now I'm after seeing a couple of I don't know if they call them compelling, but some of them were kind of spooky to watch, videos of supposed Jinn. One was in a cave, and I think the other one was outside on this hill. The video is usually pretty shaky, but when they inverse the shakiness and clean up and some of the shots and kind of freeze frame it, you start to see like this morphing figure moving through the cave, like following this guy, and he's in the video he's freaking out. It's in a different language. I don't know what he's saying, but he's clearly like losing his shit, and he keeps stopping and turning his camera back. And at specific times when you slow the footage down, you can see this thing. And I actually showed the video to a couple of Muslim guys that I know, and they're like, "Yeah, man, that's a Jinn. That's what we were taught. That's how we were taught that they are," kind of a thing. So maybe when they're in your house, when they're creeping on you in your house and they're in observation mode, that's the idea of them kind of 1 foot in their world and 1 foot in our world. They're up against the veil, as it were, and you're just seeing their shadowy outline. Now, that's the explanation that I've heard for the whole Shadow Man existence in relation with the Jinn. I'm not saying that it can't be something else entirely, or
the one thing that they do share, with the Jinn, it's always this negative connotation. They're tricksters. They're
the
they're
ones
evil.
that are the ones that don't hate people just don't interact with them.
Right, and with the shadow people, while we don't really have I'm not sure if I can think of a specific story off the top of my head where they caused harm.
They're generally
whatever.
benign.
They are, but the one thing that I hear in most stories involving them is this: people get this real sense of fear from them. Like there's this, they don't know what it is. It's just like this intensely bad feeling.
See, I've never experienced that myself, and that's probably the most prevalent paranormal thing that I've experienced is shadow men. Well, I wouldn't even say shadow men. There's more shadow figures, dark blob figures, some small, some big.
I'm the same way. I've had a couple of experiences myself, and I didn't get the this negative, overwhelming feeling.
Well, that's definitely a big point in this woman's story.
It is, and it's in several. I mean, we must have gotten a dozen submitted to us at least, and every story that I seem to get has that that overwhelming sense of dread. You remember that one we did with this? The guy had there was 2 shadow men, and they leaned in through his bedroom door.
Yeah, they're really tall, right?
Right, and the thing that's kind of parallel to this story was the way they described it as they were surveying the area. It's like she described it in the story we just told as it was a surprise to see her as she was it, like it was looking around, like it was it was exploring, and that's the same thing from this other guy's story with the 2 giant shadow men. was that they peeked their heads in the room and were looking around as if they were looking for something. They were as if they were taking notes. They were surveying. And when I think about that, it does bring to mind the interdimensional aspect, especially, and I know that we've come to that idea when we try and figure them out, but I guess the most prominent story that would reinforce that notion is at Skinwalker Ranch, when they had the infrared camera set up, and one of the guys saw a portal open up where this shadow man crawled out of it, and
all they seen with their eyes was like a little shimmering light, and through the infrared monocular, it was like a tunnel,
right, and a tunnel portal, right, portal. And then, of course, as soon as it hit the ground, all the animals went crazy. So animals, they seem to typically pick up on negative energy, and that's true for hauntings, for poltergeist activity, for even bad people. A bad person shows up at your house and you got a dog. Your dog senses that, and he's up, he's barking. Animals got this sixth sense, and it seems with the shadow people, at least in this story, on Skinwalker Ranch, they all felt it when they hit the ground. So that's the same feeling that people describe when they have an encounter with this. So there must be something to them that's evil. There has to be. Why would everybody perceive that? Unless, of course, we're going to say that it's a different energy signature, and we're just programmed to... on some level, some subconscious level, we're programmed to fear it.
If it makes us feel off in some way, it just, we fear what we don't know. And if some super primal part of your mind is picking up, there's something really not from here, you need to be wary. That's a really old instinct.
The hard wiring aspect is something that I think about more and more these days. Oddly enough, surely you've seen those funny cat videos where someone puts down a cucumber, sneaks up behind the cat while he's eating at his dish, puts down a cucumber, and the cat turns around and like jumps to the ceiling right when they see a cucumber, and everybody was wondering what the hell what scares, what is it about a cucumber that scares the shit out of these cats? Because there's all kinds of these videos. It's like it's a trending, or at least it was a trending thing. And, some people sat down, that know all kinds of stuff about this and describe what it is. And what it is that they're hardwired to be afraid of snakes. So if they see a snake in the grass or something like that, they'll instinctively jump so they don't get bitten. And so when a cat sees a cucumber at first glance, quick first glance, I guess that's instinctively what they think, and they jump. That's what they're wired to do. Maybe in terms of shadow people, remember this topic that we discussed before, where if there's a God, we're in his petri dish, right?
And if you missed that episode, we succinctly concluded, no, there's not.
No, you concluded that, not me. But I'm sure it'll rile some people up. I believe in God. Anyway, you're getting me all off topic.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I know your tricks, but if it was God's petri dish, and we're all in God's petri dish, and is all things that He made. Now we're talking about interdimensional beings. Maybe that's it. Is that they're not supposed to be here, and they're not. They have a different energy signature from here, and we're hardwired to basically avoid it. Maybe there's something about it that can corrupt His experiment. You know what I mean? Like, so we're hardwired to get the hell away from it.
Yeah, well, in that hypothesis, in that scenario, any kind of interaction would be corrupting the experiment, because you build a little biome, a little planet, and you stick a bunch of things on it, and you're going to test to see how they get along. and then you got stuff from other petri dishes crawling in. Well, that's called cross contamination.
Right. So maybe that's all it is, but shadow people are such an interesting, but yet
for such a prevalent phenomenon, for something that happens
we
to
know
so many
nothing.
people. There's nothing. We've collected no information. I don't even think there's been any correlations made with magnetic fields or hot spots or cold spots. There seems to be some very specific characteristics to a Shadow Man encounter that's different from your run-of-the-mill ghost encounter. And it's one of these weird kind of subgenres. Everybody assumed that shadow people were just, I don't know, a lazy ghost. I couldn't be bothered to put on my people suit today. I'll just do the shadow thing. That scares them just the same. But after years and years and years of reading and now collecting these stories, I'm inclined to think that they're different, that they're two very different phenomenon. And I mean, to be perfectly honest, and as scary as it sounds, I would not be surprised if there was some kind of recon observation being done.
That's what comes to my mind.
And that they were curious about the baby and may have caused some complications because of it.
Well, now I wasn't going to say exactly that, but when you said that they were, basically here gathering information, when I think about them, I think of them as almost like spies. They're here to collect some kind of information, and it seems like that in every story. They're here and they're exploring, they're looking around, like they're here for something. I just don't know what it is, but it kind of reminds me of the Men in Black. With the difference being that the Men in Black, of course, are wearing very fake-looking human skin, and they're basically confronting people directly and trying to
because without their human suit, they're a two-dimensional shadow being.
Maybe that's what it is, right? I mean, they both give off that really negative vibe that
there's something wrong here. Yeah,
there's something wrong, right? And but that's the way it seems like all the shadow people stories. Well, not all, but most seem to be is that they're here looking for something. They're always exploring. They're curious. And we don't have any stories of like bad things happening to people from them being here, despite how they feel.
Just causing a general sense of unease.
Just their presence does that. So maybe they really are here collecting some kind of information or something. But then one has to wonder, should you be one of the unfortunate people that have this encounter, what is it about you that they want to know? Right? I mean, it's creepy when you think about it. I'm not... Well, you know what? But I have seen shadow people. Now, for me, in my case, they weren't... it wasn't exactly like that. I remember seeing one in the backyard where I had a shed, and there was like a night light that was on it. And I saw one there, and it definitely wasn't a shadow. It was solid, just like how everybody else explains it. And, you could see the way it moved. It wasn't just, it wasn't against the actual shed. But anyway, yeah, so I mean, it wasn't in my house. Hey, an outdoor shadow man.
There you go.
Who would have thought? I said there was no case, and that was my story.
It turns out that you had one.
Turns out that I got a little bit of issues with my thinking.
Well, with your memory, anyways.
Yeah, I'm like a goldfish. I keep swimming around that bowl. Oh, look, a castle. Oh, look, a castle. But yeah, I mean, the shadow people, again, like we could go on forever here about them, but in terms of this woman's story, and I keep saying this woman because I totally don't believe her name is Amethyst.
It could
right?
be.
It could be, and if it is, I apologize. But in any case, in her story, it does, center back on the Shadow Man. It seems to center on the Shadow Man for sure, and on one side of her apartment. Now, so you do think that it was there, had some kind of interest in the baby then?
I think it's very possible. When it comes to pregnancies, there's a 1,001 different things that could cause complications. And it could have been something, or could be as simple as the stress that she was under, living in a house that she wasn't comfortable in. I mean, if you're not using half of your house, you got to be awfully uncomfortable in half of it. I couldn't imagine not going into half of the areas of my house. I use every part of it.
Yep.
Maybe not, every day, but there's no part of my house I would ever say, I never really went in that room ever. So there must have been something causing some very powerful emotions in her, and it could be that the result of that was the complications, or as sinister as it might be, because when I think about these things, I don't so much see spies as I see explorers, or maybe even scientists who are curious.
That could be too.
Right. And whenever it's one thing to study a strange species, but have a pregnant specimen, that'd be, for a scientist, that would be excellent. And you get to see part of their reproduction cycle.
Yeah. That's
huge when it comes to learning about biology, and maybe we're somebody's biology experiment.
Perhaps we are.
Or case study, anyway.
Well, certainly that guy that was dissected, like the cows, he was an experiment.
Oh, the guy, what was it, in Brazil?
I'm not sure exactly where. I just remember seeing the pictures, and I remember there being an analysis saying that because of the way basically the wounds indicated that he would have been alive during that whole ordeal.
Through the whole procedure, yeah.
Yeah, very, very disturbing. But anyway, that having been said, I do want to thank Amethyst for sending in her story. And what do you guys think? Do you think the shadow person is an interdimensional being? Do you think that she manifested the shadow creature? Do you think that it had more to do with her home, that something could have happened there?
Or the land itself.
Or the land itself. So let us know in the comments section. And again, if you have an effed up story that you would like to share with us, you can send that to us at effedupstories.com. That's effedupstories.com. And we will have more coming your way shortly. Thanks for listening.
Have a great night, everybody.
That her current home is haunted, but in a vastly different way than her previous experiences. So she's had many paranormal experiences in her new house. Some of these are described as disembodied voices, obvious movements in the house, things being tampered with, light anomalies, and shadows. Pretty much all the things that you would come to expect from a haunted location. And basically, she just wants to go over the shadow people experiences that she's had, because otherwise, I guess she has a lot to tell. So, having lived in many haunted houses throughout her life, she has to admit that there's something very different with the energy and the activity in her current home. Since moving there, which was in March of 2015, there was always something off about the place. There would be days to months where things felt normal. The atmosphere was light, it felt lifted, she could people. And I guess that sparked her own little story in her memory that she wanted to share with us. So, at this time, when she sent the story, which by the way was on March 30th, 2016, she was 24 years old. And at this point in her life, she had experienced 3 major encounters with the paranormal, all within the same time span of a year, and all in her present living location. Now, before she gets into the story, she wants to just give us a disclaimer and I guess a little backstory. She does believe in the paranormal. She has always believed in it since she was a child, and she had her first experience when she was around the age of 5. And the house that she spent most of her childhood in, she said, was incredibly haunted, both by poltergeist activity and what she believes to be whatever is imprinted in the land. And she suspects that it is Native American lands and that I guess something terrible had happened there. And she has an open mind within regards to the supernatural, but she never really chalks things up to being paranormal without an attempt to debunk it first. And I'm just going to chime in and say that I'm the same way. I read these stories all the time, and I've always been a fan of it. I've grown up with it, but most times when I experience strange things, I do rationalize it. I do try to make sense of it, and even when I can't, unless it was something major, something that really shocks me, I will just put it out of my head and forget about it. In fact, most times I forget to even tell anybody, or I might mention it to my wife in passing, but never really giving it the focus that it might deserve. And I think a lot of people are like that. But getting back to her story here, she said, with that said, she also came to believe for you guys while he's home, since we haven't been in the same room together for about a decade. But that said, we're going to jump into an episode here. Before we do so, if you have an effed up story of your own and you'd like to get it on the website and into a podcast, you can do so by going to effedupstories.com. That's EFFEDUPSTORIES.com. Go to the submissions link, fill out the form, hit submit, and we'll get that online. And with that having been said, we're going to jump into a user submitted story. The name that this person used, I can't see it being the real name, but anyway, an alias or what have you is Amethyst Rivet. And if you wanted to read the original on the site, it's called The Dark Side of the House. So, let's get into her story. She recently listened to one of our episodes on the shadow. Hello, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of Effed Up Stories. I am your host, Will Pender.
And I am your co-host, Ryan Sharp.
And I hope you guys have missed us as much as we have missed you. I realize we haven't done a show for a while now, and that has to do with, Ryan moved. I'm about to move. So we're going to try and stockpile a couple episodes together for you guys before Ryan comes home for vacation, which is around the time I move. And we're actually going to try and do something special.